I've talked about a lot of Sonic games over the years, but I've yet to really sit down and talk about the one that started it all. In my very first video on the channel, I talked about the development of Sonic 1 and its impact, but I didn't really go deep into the nitty-gritty of the gameplay, levels, and mechanics. So, in celebration of the 2-year anniversary of my channel, I'm gonna talk about the 1991 Sega Genesis classic, Sonic the Hedgehog. The first few games in the series are always some of the most interesting games to look at because they were made in a time before standards, traditions, and precedents had been established. Just look at Sonic 1. No spin dash, no supersonic, no tails, and the special stages are really unique. The half-pipe special stages that Sonic 2 introduced basically cannibalized the special stage market to the point where the vast majority of Sonic special stages are either the half-pipe or half-pipe inspired, with Sonic running in 3D with a behind-the-back camera. So, I gotta say, I actually like these Sonic 1 special stages. Now, obviously, they're not as good as Blue Sphere from Sonic 3 and Knuckles. You'd have to be a psychopath to like anything more than that, but they're neat. I guess I just find navigating through these trippy, weird mazes to be kind of fun. They're a bit wonky since you can only control the rotation of the stage by hitting special objects, and Sonic can also bounce off of walls even if the wall is to the side of him, so gravity is kinda weird here. Also, for some reason, Sonic Team thought it was a smart idea to put a big goal sign on the spheres that you want to avoid since they end the special stages early if you touch them. It would have been better if they just had in big text, no. Putting a goal on these spheres makes you think you'd want to go there instead of trying to find the Chaos Emerald in the stage. Actually, I have a confession to make. I don't care about the Chaos Emeralds. The only thing you get for getting all the Chaos Emeralds is flowers and the ending cutscene for the game. It isn't like in Sonic 2 where you get a cool new supersonic transformation for getting all the Chaos Emeralds, or Sonic 3 and Knuckles where you get a new final boss. I guess in Sonic 1 you do get to see Eggman throwing a temper tantrum like a big baby, but besides that, unless you're a floral decorator or just that much of a completionist, I don't really see a reason to go for the Chaos Emeralds in Sonic 1. Honestly, the best reason I have to go for special stages in this game is to get more lives and continues. By collecting 50 rings in the special stages, you get a continue, which gives you a fresh set of 3 lives if you lose all of your lives and get a game over. Nowadays, lives in gaming is an archaic concept that was once popular largely because of its role in arcade games. If you wanted to retry after getting a game over in an arcade game, you'd often have to put in more money. So the developers made these games hard as balls to rip as much cold hard cash from their players as possible. Just try and beat some of these old fighting games without using a continue. Arcade games ended up inspiring a lot of early home console games back in the 80s and 90s. Heck, one of Sega's early marketing gimmicks was to highlight how the Sega Genesis could give you arcade-like experiences in your living room. As a result, a lot of early home console games were really difficult, just like the arcade games at the time, even though they really didn't have to be. I mean, for home console games, the only thing making the game really challenging did was make the player waste more time. It wasn't like the companies that made these games were getting any more money out of the players once the players had already had the console and the game. Well, actually, now that I think about it, it is possible they wanted players to buy strategy guides. Those used to be pretty popular. Before YouTube and GameFAQs, you had to go out and buy a book. Some people even came out with early tutorial videos, but instead of being online, they were on VHS tapes. Also, games being more difficult meant you'd take longer to beat them. Rental game services were big back in the day. Instead of shelving out a ton of cash to buy a game, you could rent a copy of a game for a cheap price and beat it before the return deadline. Making games more difficult meant you wouldn't be able to beat the game in the short amount of time you had to rent it, encouraging you to go out and buy the full game. Or maybe the developers thought they could earn some extra cash from people buying replacement controllers. Alright. I'm pretty sure most people have thrown a controller or two. Wait, what was I talking about again? Oh right, Sonic 1! Getting a game over in Sonic 1 is a big punishment. It sends you all the way back to the beginning of the game if you don't have a continue to save yourself. As a result, I like getting to the special stages to get more chances at staying in the game. I've been talking a lot about the special stages, but I've yet to talk about the actual stages of the game, so let's get to those. Sonic 1 has 6 areas called zones, and each zone has 3 levels called acts. This is actually pretty interesting, as the other Genesis games only have 2 acts per zone for the most part, and even though Sonic CD has 3 acts, the third act is basically just a boss fight. You might think that this causes Sonic 1 zones to drag, but honestly, I don't feel that way. Sonic 1 stages are fairly short for the most part. Even some of the more notoriously slower paced levels don't take too long to beat. One of the things that really made Sonic unique for its time, and even to this day to some degree, is the amount of alternate routes that the stages have. A lot of 2D platformers are quite linear, and Sonic 1 is to a degree, but in a lot of the stages there's different secret areas and pathways that you can take that can lead you to have a drastically different experience in each stage. Whenever I play Sonic 1, the experience is never one-to-one the same as the last time I played it. Doing one thing differently could lead you on a completely different pathway than you took last time. Sonic 1's stage lineup is interesting. I'm not gonna spend too much time on the first zone, Green Hill Zone, because there's really not much to say that hasn't already been said by plenty of people already, including myself. It's a fantastic first zone. There's so many places to build up speed, loop-de-loops, ramps to get big air. The gameplay is incredible. Sonic was really unique for its time, a physics-based platformer where you use your environment to gain speed. Earlier I mentioned how this game doesn't have a spin dash, a move that Sonic has that was introduced in Sonic 2. This technique allowed you to rev up in a ball and instantly gain a burst of speed. This move was a great addition to Sonic's arsenal, allowing the pace of the game to remain fast and fluid. However, I also think that having a way to instantly gain speed at any time is kind of a game design crutch that goes against the spirit of Sonic the Hedgehog. The core design principle of Sonic the Hedgehog is that speed is a reward for skillful play. In Sonic 1, you really have to use your environment to gain speed. You have to use gravity, roll down hills, get running starts. Even a simple slope that would otherwise be a minor inconvenience in any other Sonic game can be a daunting challenge in Sonic 1. This can definitely make the game feel awkward, yes, but as a result, it really makes the speed feel earned in this game. I still think Sonic 2 is the better game, don't get me wrong, but that's mainly because I think the level design is a lot better. Green Hill Zone is a fantastic first zone, like I said, but unfortunately, this is the peak of Sonic 1. It's all downhill from here. Okay, maybe that's being a little bit harsh. There are some bright spots, but as a whole, I think Green Hill Zone is the best zone in the game. The second zone in the game is Marble Zone, and this is a complete 180 from Green Hill. Instead of high-speed platforming, it's a much more methodical, slower-paced zone. I understand that this was done to get the player used to precision platforming, a skill that would be very important in later stages, but there is just so much waiting in this zone. Waiting on these moving blocks, waiting for these spiked chain traps, waiting for these crushers to allow you to pass. It's just too much waiting. Marble Zone just has a lot to dislike. I don't like the level design. Graphically, I think the stage isn't really interesting, mostly just a bunch of bland looking stone blocks and lava, and Marble Zone probably has my least favorite music track in the game. It especially sucks because Green Hill Zone's music was so good. Is Marble Zone the worst stage in the game? I might be jumping the gun here a bit, but yeah, I think it is. I'm sure a lot of you out there are thinking of another zone that deserves that title, but we'll get to that in due time. Now, is there anything that I like about Marble Zone? No. Spring Yard Zone is the next stage in Sonic 1's lineup, and this one, I'll be honest, I'm not the biggest fan of either. Visually, I do like it. It's got some nice looking colors. I'm especially a fan of the evening purple cityscape background. Also, the music track for this level is pretty smooth. But the problems start arising once we get to the level design. Spring Yard Zone is really chaotic, and not in a fun and exciting way, more of a confusing and annoying way. There are these bumpers everywhere, these blue fake Sonic-like enemies that just show up out of nowhere to attack you, and of course, there's quite a few springs that can instantly send you flying away. It feels like sometimes the stage wants to be fast-paced and speedy, but then it throws you these slow, vertical moving blocks that you have to get through. Although, I do like how this stage emphasizes rolling around, really encouraging you to make use of the game's physics. One interesting thing about this level is that it seems like this stage was planned to be the second to last zone in the game and not the third zone. Earlier in development, it looked like the zone order for Sonic 1 was going to be Green Hill, then Labyrinth, then Marble, then Starlight, then Spring Yard, then finally Scrap Brain. Honestly, I think this level order makes a lot of sense. You start off with Green Hill Zone, easily the most natural looking zone. There isn't much in the way of technology. Then Labyrinth Zone, which looks like the ruins of an old civilization. It's overgrown and filled with water, but there's still some machinery. Then you go to Marble Zone, which appears to be the remnants of some forgotten society like Labyrinth Zone, but Marble Zone feels a bit more modern, like this civilization may not have been abandoned for as long. Starlight Zone of course looks like a construction site. It's like a new city is being built. Then Spring Yard Zone, which looks like it takes place in a full-fledged city. There's lights, moving blocks, and technology everywhere. Then finally Scrap Brain Zone is a completely mechanized base filled with dangerous traps and machines. This old zone order does a great job of gradually moving from a rich environment filled with life to an evil, soulless fortress of machines. Sonic's goal in this game is to save the animals being held captive by Dr. Eggman's machines, and by getting the true ending where you get all of the Chaos Emeralds, flowers bloom, making the world more lively and natural. There's a pretty obvious environmental message going on here, so this old stage order makes sense from a thematic perspective. The biggest downside to this original stage order though is that you have to go through Labyrinth Zone and Marble Zone back to back. Speaking of Labyrinth Zone is the 4th zone in Sonic 1's lineup, and it's widely regarded as the worst zone in the game. Like Marble Zone, it's a slower paced zone that requires more careful platforming. But also, water. Lots and lots of water. Someone better go warn IGN. If you stay in the water too long without getting one of these air bubbles, you drown. Also, Sonic's movement is a lot less tight and more floaty when he's in the water. On top of the water, there's traps, enemies that pop out of the ground, among other obstacles. As a result, Labyrinth Zone is quite hated amongst the fandom, with many people considering it to be the worst zone in the game. Personally, yeah, it's definitely near the bottom, but honestly, I only think it's the second worst, right above Marble Zone. The reason I prefer it to Marble Zone is that Labyrinth Zone at least has an engaging gimmick in having to manage your air. Knowing you could potentially drown if you aren't careful adds a layer of tension that just isn't present in Marble Zone. You could play it safe and stop at every air bubble, or play faster and riskier by only getting air when absolutely necessary. Visually, both Labyrinth Zone and Marble Zone aren't particularly amazing, but I do like how Labyrinth Zone has this sort of wavy effect that the water gives to the blocks that are underwater. Besides that, there is one other reason why I prefer Labyrinth Zone to Marble Zone. Labyrinth Zone is a great track, much better than Marble Zone. Marble Zone's music isn't bad, mind you, but it's just the weakest of the 6 zone themes. Another zone with great music is the next one, Starlight Zone. After pushing through the lava of Marble Zone, the annoying bumpers in Spring Yard, and grueling through the waters of Labyrinth Zone, we finally get to another one of the better zones. Like Green Hill Zone, Starlight has a bigger emphasis on speed. Starlight is not as good as Green Hill due to a few problems. Visually, Starlight Zone is honestly kinda boring. The background is just a city at night without the colors of Spring Yard. The foreground is just this green construction site. I don't know, I'm not really vibing with it. Also, the level design is a bit meh at times. There are these seesaws and fans that you have to deal with, which contribute to a slower and less fluid pace than Green Hill. Also, I think Starlight feels a bit more automated than Green Hill. Like, the sections where I go fast in Starlight feel more scripted, whereas in Green Hill, you had to have good timing and anticipation to keep up speed for the most part. But honestly, after Labyrinth Zone, I can't complain too much. Starlight Zone is still fun to zoom around in, and it acts as one last hurrah before the final zone of the game, Scrap Brain Zone, Eggman's Domain. I used to really not like this zone. It's filled with buzzsaws, crushers, exploding enemies, flamethrowers, instant death trapdoors, blocks that fade in and out of existence. It's a nightmare. But honestly, I really do enjoy the challenge now. Things are constantly happening. There's usually never a dull moment in this zone. I dig the reddish dystopian looking background, and the music is pretty good too. One really weird thing about this zone is that it only has 2 acts. I mean, technically it has 3 acts, but the third act is, surprise, Labyrinth Zone Act 4. Eggman trolls you at the end of Scrap Brain Zone Act 2 by dropping Sonic back into the ruins of Labyrinth Zone, although this time it's got a gray color scheme. This level does have a shortcut at the beginning that you can take by running past this platform that slides down, so this level honestly isn't too bad. Labyrinth Zone Act 4, Scrap Brain Zone Act 3 doesn't have a boss like all of the other Act 3s, but at the end of Act 3, you jump on a spring which bounces you into the final zone, which is where the final boss of the game is. I realized I haven't talked about the bosses at all in this game, and that's because they really aren't all that interesting. They're all fairly simple and easy to beat. The final boss does require a bit more thought as you only have a short window to attack Eggman once he appears in one of 2 crushers, but it still isn't too tough. But yeah, that's Sonic the Hedgehog. I guess I'll go ahead and rank the zones. At the bottom is Marble Zone, then Labyrinth Zone above that, then I'll probably say Spring Yard, then Scrap Brain, then Starlight, then finally Green Hill at the top. Sonic 1 does have some flaws. The pacing, the inconsistent level design, the occasionally annoying gimmicks, but I still think there's an unrefined beauty to Sonic 1. The pixel art is great, which still makes the game visually hold up to this day. The music is timeless, and while unpolished, the speedy, physics-based platforming has some bright spots. It makes sense that literally the next game in the series, Sonic 2, would fix a lot of Sonic 1's issues to become one of the best games in the franchise. Speaking of 2s, it's officially been 2 years since I started this channel. I want to thank everyone who's watched even a single one of my videos. This year for the channel was definitely slower than the last one, but we still grew a lot. The channel gained about 25,000 new subscribers, putting the channel at 69,000 subscribers. Very nice. I'm also getting closer and closer to uploading my 100th video on the channel. I'm really excited to take everything I've learned to make next year even better than ever. At the end of the day, all that's left to say is, thanks for watching y'all, and have a great rest of your day.